Hi all, back again. Next one, Westbury Ironworks. This is by Cogswell and was written in 1988. I can remember Westbury Ironworks from as far back as my memory goes. I can remember its fire in the sky. Its tall, red-painted bulk fascinated me as a very small boy, and in due course it was the scene of my first training in down-to-earth engineering. The areas of water scattered about near the railway lines through Westbury are iron ore workings long abandoned and flooded. Now mostly fringed, when not actually invaded, by tangles of self-planted bushes and trees, they are the only readily noticed traces of bygone Westbury Ironworks, an industrial complex that once turned the area round it into a land of fire. Local people call them mine holes. The ironworks itself was close to and roughly parallel to the outer tracks of Westbury Station, GWR that was. In its later years, the view of it from the platform was a skyline dominating an array of round tank-like objects standing on end. Also giant-sized tubes, lofty engine, houses, tall chimney stacks, an electric power station with a scattering of workshops, stores and the like. And right in the foreground, a chemical laboratory having the general aspect of an unprepossessing bungalow with an outside ventilator in its roof. Heaps of ashes and other rubbish were also there to be seen. All that set in a network of private railway tracks and 2-foot gauge tram roads. Westbury was, and still is, an important junction station, and in the heyday of railways, its 4 platforms were often thronged with passengers, changing or waiting for trains. At night especially, those passengers might be treated to a fire spectacular. As the works was laid out, the molten iron and slag coming from the blast furnaces was directed onto the area between the main part of the plant and the station, so that the glare from the streaming fire lit up the towering structures overlooking it, so as to make them appear to be red hot. Against that fiery background, men could be seen at strenuous labour, while above all, engine from engine exhaust and steaming smoke in the sky flickered as if red hot too. Goodness, it sounds like it was quite a spectacular event, but I can imagine it must have been quite smelly as well. Lots of steam, lots of smoke. It must have been, maybe quite difficult to see if the wind was coming in the wrong direction. The last time anybody saw that was in 1923, for it was in that year that the last furnace was blown out. But the quarrying of limited amounts of iron ore went on until the later 1930s. However, in 1939, the whole ironworks was demolished, and over the ensuing years, its site was put to other industrial uses. The quarries, those not full of water already, were allowed to flood. Some were used for the dumping of domestic and industrial rubbish. Others were more or less filled by earthworks for new railway tracks. Some were left as they were. However, the flooded ones have some recreational value. One is a boating lake, all offer coarse fishing, and all provide a habitat for water-frequenting birds. In the mid-19th century, when Westbury Ironworks was started, the most up-to-date blast furnaces were the Staffordshire type. The natural draught in the chimney pot, like funnel, did a lot to shield the charging platform men from the upcoming smoke and flames. Openings around the base of the funnel serve for the materials, ore, coke and limestone, to be tipped in, so as to fall down through the throat into the stack beneath. Smelting of iron is a continuous process, the stack being kept topped up as the material works down. Sounds like it must have been quite a very dirty, hot, hard job to actually work there too, doesn't it? The presence of iron ore at Westbury must have been known from ancient times. The Tithe-War documents of 1838 indicate a piece of ground described as iron mould allotments beside Shallow Wagon Lane, a neglected drove between Ham and Haywood. There had been a Romano-British settlement in the Ham area, and when it came to extracting ore for the ironworks, a well was found penetrating an 11-foot seam. Romano-British artefacts were found in that well. Sounds they knew what they were doing all that time ago. The mid-19th century expansion of the railway system triggered off the development of the ironworks at Westbury. Its approach to Westbury was through a cutting which traverses iron mould allotments. This rail transport, with its resultant ready access to markets and supplies, made the exploitation of the iron ore deposits about Westbury an economic proposition. The ore was close to the surface, so there was no need for deep mining. Added bonuses were that the limestone essential to the smelting process could be quarried in the Westbury district, as we all know from the Westbury White Horse. And there were never failing supplies of good spring water. Also, sand in plenty could be obtained without going out of the town. The answer to the problem of the high cost of transporting chalk from the hill on the far side of Westbury town came from literally out of the ground near the works, and about level with it, a seam of coralline limestone not far below the surface. So hand quarry was developed, and the chalk quarry up on the hill given up to remain deserted until the early 1900s. It was John Kelson, an amiable eccentric, who brought it to life. He took it over in some way together with the adjoining woodland, the stable building lower down and the house in the trees behind, and turned it all into a public recreation park, which he announced as the people's own estate. He provided a tea house and a number of rustic shelters, some in shady places, and some in areas of open views, while scattered about were swings for all ages, and the usual paraphernalia of children's playgrounds. Even a three-sided shelter large enough for the Westbury Town Band. The tea house, named the Bungalow, was a properly carpentered wooden building, approached by a quite elaborate grand staircase, wide enough for 4 persons to walk abreast. The rustic shelters, which he built himself, were constructed of larch poles, cut in the wood, which at that time was only partly of beech trees. He even went so far as to have some of those beech trees trimmed to be safe for children to climb. But the project was a failure. For one thing, it was too far out from the town, except perhaps on fine bank holidays, when then it was only patronised on a limited scale. Also, there was no water on the site except for rainwater collected from the tea house roof. Doesn't sound very palatable, does it? But John Kelson managed for water by bringing it up from below. The new reservoir at the bottom of Short River Road was in use by then with a tap for public use in the road outside. A water cart would have been the answer. They were made at Bratton, 2 miles away, and he brought it up in churns in a pony trap of the type called a governess car. He gave up People's Own Estate about the time of the start of the First World War. I think it would have been lovely to actually been able to see the site. I don't know if there's any of you living near Westbury who know of it and know whether there are any remains left from what sounded like a lovely parkland area all those years ago.